Hey, welcome back to the Wide Right Podcast. It's been a minute. I'm Manny Navarro from The Athletic, joined today by Adam Lichtenstein of the South Florida Sun-Sentinel. It is Thursday, April 17th, right around 5:15 p.m. And spring football has wrapped up at the University of Miami. We were back officially into portal season. A lot has happened since we did our last show 3 months ago, Carlos Ledo and I. Now we got Adam on to talk about Miami spring football, how it went. Adam, at the time I did my last show, Carson Beck and the offense, they were just sort of coming together. They were finishing up the recruiting class. How would you describe what the last 3 months of Miami football has been like?
Well, I guess if I could sum it up in a headline, it would just or like a movie title would be Waiting for Carson. We didn't get a chance to see him at all during spring. He didn't throw at all. He didn't speak to the media. He basically was just kind of looming around practice, and he was doing his rehab. He was doing work during practice, but he wasn't throwing. He wasn't a full participant, just kind of rehabbing, um, going through some limited things that he could do, without using his arm, things like handoffs, footwork, things like that. So that's kind of where we've been the last couple of months. He's here. The team seems to like him from what, they all say. Obviously, they're not gonna say anything bad about him, but they're gelling with him. He's doing all the you know, new quarterback things, taking the offensive line out for dinner, inviting friends over, or teammates over to his house and stuff. So we're doing all that, but we just haven't seen him actually play yet.
Yeah, and he did start throwing this week, right after spring football ended, from what I've heard, and everything looks like it's going fine. Brock Purdy had the same exact injury, uh, the quarterback of the San Francisco 49ers, in the NFC Championship game. Kind of the same timeline, right? When you think about it, came back 5 months later, so we're about the same timeline following surgery. So. He's expected to start fall camp and be the starter and be the guy and have plenty of time to um, you know, work with the players that are on the roster and then develop some chemistry. So I don't think there's going to be any issues with that. But I went into spring camp this year with some questions about this roster, namely the wide receiver position, right? Xavier Restrepo's gone, Jacoby George, lost some guys to the transfer portal, one legitimate starter in terms of returning experience, and that was JoJo Trader with one start essentially in the bowl game. So they went out, they got
Yeah, that's a returning starter right there.
yeah, that's your one returning starter. There's a guy who's actually started a game for you, and then the other was CJ Daniels, who they picked up in the transfer portal. And CJ, comes over with 30 career starts to his belt, doesn't participate in the spring because he's recovering from an injury. And he'll be fine for the start of the season, from what I understand. But essentially, you have a bunch of freshmen out there, right? You got Josh Moore, Malachi Tony, Dalen Upshaw. We've since seen Nye Carr enter the transfer portal, so one fewer receiver in there. But what did you think of the wide receiver play? You went to the spring game. I didn't. I was broadcasting an ESPN game for FIU baseball, so I wasn't there to watch the spring game. But what did you think of the receivers? And is it a position that you still worry about here as we enter the transfer portal period?
Well, I would say a little six of one, half dozen of the other in terms of confidence and worry. You're never going to be fully confident or satisfied until you see these players do things in a game. Um, you can only do so many reps against air or against your own DBs in practice, in shells and stuff, before you can't really tell 100%. You're not going to know till you see it, in August and September. But that being said, I like Miami's receivers. Do I think they're gonna be as good as, the Restrepo, Jacoby George, throwing tight ends, Elijah Arroyo, and all those guys, Isaiah Horton? Are they gonna be as good as that? I don't know, at least not yet, but I think they're capable. CJ Daniels, we didn't see him a ton during the spring. He was out with an injury. He did get in a bit towards the end. I don't remember if he played in the spring game or not, but so he did play a bit in spring, was decent for LSU, was great for Liberty. So, we'll see how he ends up doing. He got rave reviews in terms of just his off the field makeup and basically, some of the younger receivers were talking about him like he was like a second receivers coach, basically, that they met with him every day before they met with Kevin Beard. So, interesting to see what he does this year. JoJo Trader, I've been high on, since high school. We've seen him a ton down here, having played for the Miami Central or Northwestern. I always get them mixed up. And then Chaminade, uh, I think he's going to be a stud. I'm very confident that he's going to be a good receiver. And then after that, it's kind of like, well, we'll see. Ray Joseph, I still think he's a capable receiver. He spent 2 years backing up Xavier Restrepo. He was battling it out with freshman Malachi Tony, who, really stood out in the spring, and especially in the spring game, could fill in the slot there. And then, you know, you got Josh Moore, who's a freshman who looks like a junior, but, still might be a little bit raw. Overall, I think there's a lot of talent in the room, um, but it has to be probably coached up a bit more. Like I said, talking about the slot receiver, he made some good plays in the spring game. Tony was probably the star of the spring game, but I think he's the youngest player on the team. I would assume
Yeah.
so. If not the youngest, he's one of the youngest because he was a reclassified
Reclassified. Yeah.
2026 kid. So if he's probably, I think, 16, 17 years old and he's competing for a starting spot, which, it's good because he's got the talent, but you probably want someone more experienced than, brand new to college, 16 or 17-year-old competing for a starting spot. But, I think there's talent there. Could they use more and more depth? Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, and I think they're obviously going to try to hit that here in the transfer portal. I think I've been saying that since December that they can't go into the season with just one veteran receiver. It's just
Yeah.
coaching malpractice really more than anything else. You have to have some guys that have played before, especially if you're going to go out and spend, $3 million to get a guy like Carson Beck to come to your school, right? You got to surround those quarterbacks with players that they can trust. And it's not that the freshmen aren't talented, Adam. It's just they're young and you don't know injury wise. I mean, depth wise. I mean, this was a position that had eight scholarship players and then nine car left. So just from sheer numbers perspective, you need to add a few more guys. And so one of them, obviously, I think that everybody's talking about since the transfer portal opened on Wednesday, is Trevor Penna, who is the wide receiver from Syracuse, who led the ACC in receptions. Fran Brown, his coach, uh, went on the radio last night and was like, we weren't going to pay this guy $2 million. Apparently, that's what he was asking for. I don't know if that's how much Trevor Penner is honestly going to make in the free agency here. I don't know that any receiver will. Maybe Jeremiah Smith, if he were to enter the portal, but more likely than not, that's a guy that I think Miami will be targeting. There will be other veterans as well, other positions. We'll talk about that in a minute, but just continuing with the receiver and offensive perspective because that's where so much of the change from a personnel standpoint has taken part in here in the offseason. Um, what grabbed you about the offense in the spring game? Was there anything? Was there anything that stood out to you and said, "Hey, Cam Ward is gone, Xavier Strepo's gone, but I really think they're going to be okay on offense." Was there something that made you feel confident at all?
No, but there's an asterisk with that no. The asterisk is a lot of guys didn't play. Obviously, Carson Beck didn't play. JoJo Trader didn't play. Josh Moore didn't play. Elijah Lofton didn't play. And those are, maybe not Josh Moore. We'll see how much he plays this year, but that's three key contributors. Really important guys who are going to be on this offense this year, and they didn't play. So, you had Emory Williams, Judd Anderson, and Luke Nickel kind of rotating through, taking reps. And it's the spring game. They're even though it's not being televised or anything, they really kept it vanilla. Um, it must have been probably 15 plays, I think, before they threw the ball more than 5 yards downfield. A lot of, dump offs, throws to the running backs and stuff. So they weren't really doing a ton in the spring game by design.
Hmm.
So I can't like say, oh yeah, during the spring game they looked electric because they didn't. But they're also going to have a newer, more experienced, better quarterback, in the fall. They're going to have their the guy who I think is probably going to be their top wide receiver, in the fall. They're going to have the guy who's probably their top tight end in the fall. So it's like, you know, how much can you really gather from the spring game? The one thing that caught my eye in a negative sense, though, about the offense during the spring game was Miami had the ball. Miami had the ball. Miami always had the ball in the spring game, but the offense had the ball inside the 5 yard line, first down, and they tried to run it basically right up the middle 4 times and got stuffed. Defense got to stop. Now, it's a spring game. How much you want to attribute that to good run defense versus bad run blocking? 6 of one, half dozen of the other. Mario Cristobal, I asked him about it after the game, and he kind of got on my case. Said, "Oh, you have to ask me. You had to ask me about that." He's like, as a former offensive lineman, how do you think I felt? I think he said he wanted to projectile vomit was the quote after watching that series. But He also credited the defense for making the stop. So was that a little concerning? Yeah, but it's one drive in a spring game. I'm not going to read too much into it, into anything really that happened in the spring game. But just a note, something that I saw, and I'm like, okay, well, why couldn't they punch it in with from 5 yards out on 4 plays with Mark Fletcher and Jordan Lyle? But
Right.
it's one series in a spring game. I wouldn't, I take everything with 100 grains of salt.
Of course, and things that look different with Carson Beck out there. Defense will have to respect the offense a little differently, especially if you get a Trevor Penna in the portal or somebody else to help fortify that receiver position. I think offensive line is something that is somewhat interesting to me because you are losing some veterans that were pretty good for you, guys that were regular starters. Obviously Jalen Rivers, who's here for a long time. You're going to have Markel Bell, who did start 5 games last year at left tackle. You are going to have Inez Cooper and Francis Mauigoa back at right guard and right tackle. But the left guard and center position, in some ways, is going to feature some guys who have played and haven't played here before, right? You got Matthew McCoy, who's played here. You got Ryan Rodriguez, who's played here before he got hurt in the Florida game. And then you added James Brockermeyer from TCU. What were they saying about the offensive line in spring camp? I mean, we just talked about that situation near the goal line, obviously, but I'm curious, what was the takeaway from the coaches and how they feel about the offensive line? Because you'd think on paper that's going to be one of the strengths of this team, but maybe it isn't. Maybe there's some question marks about left guard and the center position.
Yeah, I mean, I do think overall it'll be a strength. I mean, the right side of the line, you got Inez Cooper, who's been a starter since halfway through his freshman year, and I remember Mario said maybe about halfway through camp that he might have been having the most impressive camp of any player on the team, just in getting in improving in kind of finishing. I think one thing Alex Murbaugh mentioned was like he was finishing plays and stuff like that. So they're very complimentary of him. And then Francis Mauigoa, I mean, this is former 5-star like top 10 prospect. Um, Going into his third year. Like he got better his sophomore year from his freshman year. I think they still expect a lot from him. I mean, this could be his last year in college. Should be probably his last year in college if he performs the way I think people expect him to perform. So I think the right side of the line, if those guys stay healthy, is pretty much locked down. I know Mirabal was extremely complimentary of James Brockermeyer. You could tell he's a kid who comes from a football family. Like, I think Mirabal said he showed up with basically everything down pat. Like, he showed up prepared and like ready to go from day one. So they were very complimentary of him. And then the left side, I mean, Markel Bell. I mean, first off, I mean, the same thing we've been talking about him since he arrived is that he's just a massive, massive human being. Looking at him, it's crazy. I mean, like the spring game, obviously, to get a closer look. Literally, we're closer to the field than we are during a regular season game. And seeing him up close, next to other massive human beings on the offensive line, it's still like he's in a whole other universe. Like, dude is just huge. So that's just crazy. But that's just crazy. But he looked like from my very, very amateur eye, looked like he was had dexterity, like he was able to bend and move pretty well for a guy who's 6'9", 340. I'm not an offensive line coach or a scout, but looked good to me. I think he'll be solid. He got better throughout the year because I remember when he first started subbing in for Jalen Rivers last year, people wanted him out, like wanted to hit somebody else in because he was whiffing, he was not doing particularly well. He got better through the course of the year to the point where even when Jalen Rivers came back, um, they pushed Jalen Rivers inside so that they can get Markel Bell on the
Yeah.
field. So I think he's progressed a lot from when he first got here. And I think Alex Mirabal said the same, if I remember right. This is, I'm thinking back about a month ago now. He said about the same thing that, it's night and day, that he came here coached well, but it's night and day from when he first arrived. And I think that'll show up this year. And then, yeah, left guard's the big question mark, whether they go with Matt McCoy, they go with Ryan Rodriguez, two guys who've been in the program for a while. Hell, I think Ryan Rodriguez is one of like two guys left over who was recruited by Manny Diaz. So,
Hmm.
two guys who've been there a while. I think Mario's very high on Ryan Rodriguez, always very complimentary of him. And then Matt McCoy, I think, looked pretty solid in the time he got at left guard last year.
Yeah, graded out 21st among 47 ACC offensive guards with at least 200 snaps. So McCoy
Yeah,
did
so not
his
bad.
job, but Ryan Rodriguez, I guess, was the starter at Florida before he got hurt in that game, and so it'd be interesting to see if there's any movement there. That'll be an interesting position battle to watch moving forward. What about the tight end position? Because they're technically part of the offensive line, and they went out and they got Alex Bauman from Tulane and Jack Nickel from UAB, and obviously you still have Elijah Lofton, who's a Swiss Army knife over there, and a couple of freshmen that just got in through the door, and Brock Schott and Luka Gilbert. But I'm curious, what did the tight end position look like without Elijah Royal there?
Yeah, a lot of targets, but not really any explosive plays that I can remember off the top of my head. Um, shot. I know Mario Cristobal. The thing that stood out to me was Cristobal said he called him like a predator, like from the Predator movies.
Yeah.
Um, and I think the thing that was stood out to me about him was that he was such a good not just tight end in high school, but a defensive end in high school. And I jokingly asked like Shannon Dawson about whether he had to fight Jason Taylor about who got to coach him. But Cody Woodall actually said like once Schott decided that he was going to play tight end, it was settled from there. But uh, they're high on him. Luka Gilbert, very interesting guy. He's like a 6'7" tight end, so he's that big target that quarterbacks love. Like I said, he got a few targets in the spring game, but nothing super explosive. Alex Bauman, I think, will be a very solid target, like he was at Tulane. Kind of guy who they can go to in the red zone, who can get open in that kind of short space. He had like I think 6 or 7 touchdowns last year in like 200 receiving yards. So a good short yardage guy who they could target in the red zone. Jack Nickel, we'll see how much they use him. I don't think he played a ton at his old school. Don't remember off the top of my head. I don't think he played a ton, but
No,
he's a
100,
guy.
117 snaps at UAB in 24,
Yeah,
so not a
yeah. So
ton.
like, yeah, I don't expect him to get 500 snaps this year, especially once Lofton's back in the lineup. But a guy who could get some play on special teams, who could come in as a blocking tight end potentially, a useful guy to have. And it's good to have experience in that room. Now that you lose Elijah Arroyo, who had experience, you lose Cam McCormick, who had more experience than anybody, and you lose Riley Williams, who would have been a third-year tight end. So good to have, two guys who have a couple of years of college under their belt instead of just having Elijah Lofton, who's a sophomore, and a couple freshmen.
Yeah, one thing I heard from a couple of scouts and people that have been out to the practices during the spring was one person in particular who said that even though Miami only has four scholarship running backs on the roster right now, and obviously Lofton and the kid from St. Thomas Aquinas, Lyle will be the 1-2 punch. That ultimately, if they need a third guy, it could very well be Elijah Lofton because
Yeah.
he did it he did in high school a ton. Did you see any of that throughout the spring, or did the coaches try to hide that from you guys when they played?
We didn't really see any of that. That was not
Yeah.
in the media viewing part of
Yeah.
practice. Oh, and one other guy, speaking of tight ends, who I wanted to give a shout out to. So I might have mentioned him on this podcast before or somewhere before. But I remember, I think it might have been last spring. I'm watching them go through drills, and I'm like, who the heck is this tall tight end? Like, who is this guy? Who's this walk on? This kid named Owen Ruskovich. He's like a
Hmm.
6'7", 240-pound tight end, walk on. And I'm like, he's got the build. Like, that's interesting. He got some play in the spring game, and he didn't look too bad.
That's
So I was like,
interesting.
okay, like maybe we see him a bit on the field this year. Like I said, he's got the size. I don't know much about him. We've never spoken to him, and the coaches have never, I don't think, ever really spoken of him. But he's on the roster, and he's intriguing at least, and he got some play in the spring game. So shout out to him.
Let's flip it over to defense. Obviously, new defensive coordinator who you got a chance to talk to a couple times. I probably will at some point. I don't know when, but I've seen the interviews, and he is a typical Mario guy. He is not going to give away a whole lot in those press conferences, and rightfully so. I mean, these coaches, this is their job, right? He's a defensive coach, so play defense. But Miami spent a lot of money to fix that secondary. A lot of new faces out there, and the one that I heard repeatedly from people who were at practice and got to actually watch the things that the media couldn't was that Zachariah Poyser is the real deal and a really good safety, and that's going to make a big difference for Miami this coming season. They also went out, added Xavier Lucas from Wisconsin at the cornerback position. He'll probably be a starter with OJ Frederick. You got Charles Brantley, the veteran from Michigan State, Ethan O'Connor from Washington State. Um, Emmanuel Carnley, who's a
Conley,
big,
yeah.
yeah, a big long guy, big long corner. In what you were able to gather, and again, they were going against backup quarterbacks, right? Like we know that's the deal. That it's Emory Williams and Luke Nickel. They're not going to play this year. It's Carson Beck's time. What did they look like? I guess from what you were able to see and gather from camp.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, bunch of grains of salt to throw in there, but Poyser, I agree, looks legit. Like, dude put up great numbers as a freshman at Jacksonville State, which was a pretty solid team in Conference USA last year. I think he's one of those guys who you catch on the way up. You know, those transfers that you catch on the way up. Because he looks the part. Everything I saw from him look good. I mean, I didn't see him play a ton. We only get to watch so much of like, one-on-one drill stuff like that in practice. But yeah, he looks legit. Xavier Lucas, same thing. He's got that speed. That was one of the few things, like I said, they in the spring game they weren't throwing downfield a ton. But one thing I noticed is that he had some really nice closing speed. I think on a short pass, he came up and made a tackle. Like he was there in an instant. Like I really liked what I saw from him. Carnley I saw had some nice plays just in drills during spring. Brantley, I guess the scoop on him that Ray told us is that he's a trash talker. He called him like Ray called him spicy, so that'll be fun. Something to follow up on during the year and see if he pisses off some opposing wide receivers or something. Didn't see a ton of O'Connor. I don't think he was hurt during spring, if I remember right. It's so hard to keep track. There's so many, especially so many new guys. But didn't really see a ton from him. But not to say that he wasn't good. I just didn't really nothing really flash about him to me. And yes, I mentioned Carnley, Lucas. Who am I forgetting? Did I hit all of them? I don't know.
You
There's
hit
so
all
many there.
you hit all the
Yeah,
new arrivals for sure.
yeah,
Frederic obviously is back, and he'll be one of the outside corners
yeah.
probably. But
Damari
there
Brown
was
looked Damari Brown looked all right too in the spring game.
yeah
Like he
that
had a lot of reps. He looked all right.
Yeah, it's important you bring him up because I thought if he would have been healthy this past season, he might have solved a lot of Miami's problems, and I know the staff certainly feels that way in terms of coverage. But it's one of those deals with Damari that it cost him basically all last year. Should have been playing, lost that season of experience. Um, the way the coaches talk about Damari, I'm curious, do you feel like he is ready, like this fall is going to be his time?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, he's going to be in the mix. Like, I mean, there's so many guys. Like you said, it'll probably be Lucas and Frederic on the outside. But I think Brown, he can mix in at outside corner. He can mix in at nickel. Like, I think he'll get on the field. He'll get a fair shake. He's got the talent. I think he's got the ability. Now it's a very crowded cornerback room, so we'll see where things shake out exactly and where the coaches, um, how they want to sort out the depth chart. But I think he'll get a shot. I think now this is the time for him. Like you said, he missed all last year. He would have been a starter last year. Um, Now he's been, I don't want to say he's been recruited over, but at least recruited with guys who are on par with him. So
Yeah.
he's gonna have to battle for those spots, those reps and those snaps in games. I think he's capable of winning, more and more time. I think he's capable of being an ACC starter. He's gonna have to go out there and prove it.
Yeah, it's got to stay healthy. It's the most important thing.
Yeah,
I've seen great players get to this program, and you're just like, man, can't stay healthy, right? And they just never pan out. Hopefully for
for sure.
Damari, it's past him. Safety is obviously the big question mark on defense after Poiser because you need two back there. And Miami, look, they just took Florida's defensive backs coach away, so everybody's assuming that a guy like Greg Smith, who entered the transfer portal now here in the spring would probably reunite with his old coach down here at Miami, or that the Hurricanes, one way or the other, are going to spend money to get another safety out there. But I'm curious, who looked good opposite Poiser? Obviously, Zaquan Patterson entered the portal and decided to take off. I heard he was just not the kind of guy who Miami could really rely upon. He's more of a see ball hit ball guy at the safety position. You gotta know what you're doing back there, put guys in the right position, play the quarterback position a little bit back there on the back of the defense. So I think that's probably what they're looking for is another guy to sort of line up there with.
Hello.
Looks like I lost you there, bro.
Oh, oh, okay. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, we got
You
disconnected.
froze, so
Yeah,
okay.
I
But
apologize for that. I don't know what's going
no,
on.
it's all good.
Zoom is acting crazy. But what I was trying to say is The safety position is the thing everybody's looking at, the big question mark going into the offseason. Obviously, you got Poyser, who it looks like a true number one, but they need a second guy. Zaquan Patterson just left via the portal. Everything I heard regarding Patterson was that he can't really be relied upon in terms of understanding everything that was needed in the defense, right? He was more of a see ball, hit ball kind of guy, and you need guys that can at least understand the coverages and dole out assignments, etc., and lead the defense, quarterback the defense from back there. You got Markeith Williams, you got Dylan Day, two younger guys, although Williams has been here a while. You got Amari Wallace, who I know had the pick in the spring game, but looks like Miami's going to go look for through free agency to land somebody. Greg Smith is somebody who's been rumored to them, the ex-Florida safety. So curious from your thoughts, what Miami ultimately does there at safety.
Yeah, no, I mean, well, first off, I mean, a little bummed to see Zaquan go. Liked covering him in high school, and at UM. I do think he has the potential to be a very good player, but I could definitely see where that can come into play where it's like he's a go get the ball playmaker kind of kid, and maybe not the best at like you said, kind of be understanding the assignments in the defense. If that so that's a shame to see him leave UM, hometown kid. So. Yeah, but then, like you said, Poyser is very clearly got his spot pretty much locked down. Markeith Williams was the guy I think who teamed up with him most with the first team, getting first team reps. Um, like you said, a guy who's been around the program for a while, as a reserve. It would be interesting to see, how he does after so many years, backing guys up. I don't know if he's like he's got the ability to play at this level. He might. I don't know. I didn't nothing about him screamed like screamed out at me during the spring, but he also didn't look bad. So, you know, maybe a TBD on him. Dylan Day is a guy who, I'm very intrigued by, playmaker out of Louisiana, and he made some good plays last year on special teams, and now he's probably going to get a chance to try to earn a spot on defense. He made some good plays that I noticed just during practices. He made a pick in the spring game. So I'm intrigued to see what he's able to do. And then, like you said, Amari Wallace had a pick in the spring game, very promising freshman out of Miami. So, I'm very like you said, they probably got to go hunting in the portal for another guy who can solidify the second spot if they don't want to, trust that role to somebody who doesn't have starting experience.
Yeah, that's the secondary. I think they will be much improved there. I think Corey Heatherman he had some success at Minnesota with some pretty talented DBs. I think the talent level is very comparable, if not better, at Miami than what he had
You'd hope
at
it's better than at
Minnesota.
Minnesota.
Although he had some outstanding freshmen there in the secondary that were really, really good, All-American type guys. But we'll see. We'll see what happens with this group. Let's talk about the front seven. Defensive line. I think Miami's probably going to go out and add a defensive tackle. In fact, reportedly they're in the mix for kid out of Boise State, who just entered. I think his name is Felly, Braxton Felly, who started a bunch of games and potentially could be a guy that they take a look at there at that position. And then, linebacker. You have Wesley Bissainthe, who's started 26 games in his career. You have Jalen Alderman, who started 20, including his time at Louisville. You got Popo Geary, you got Cam Pruitt, you got Bobby Washington, Malik Bryant. You got a bunch of guys. Chase Smith, who I heard a lot about in camp. Let's start with linebacker. Um, what do you think of that position and the state of it right now? And do you think Miami will go out and get somebody?
I think they probably should. I mean, kind of similar spot to where they were the last couple of years, where they went out and they didn't grab, a high end, start every, play every snap kind of guy, but they grabbed 2 years ago it was KJ Cloyd. Last year it was Jalen Alderman, guys who can play 200 to 400 snaps in a rotation with the other guys who, and, not miss a beat. I think they could use another guy like that who they can team with Basaint or Alderman. A guy who can do well, but, doesn't need to be getting 600 snaps a season. Uh, I do like some of the younger guys. I like Popo. He was the guy when I mentioned that fourth down goal line stop. He was the guy who got the tackle on that. I think, and he did pretty well if I remember right. In when he got on the field last year, I think he dealt with an injury, but when he was on the field, he was pretty solid. I'm also very very intrigued by Bobby Pruitt. Just something about like a lanky linebacker who is able to kind of a fast lanky linebacker who can make good plays in pass defense always intrigues me. I think he could be a guy who he might not play a ton, but I think he's a guy who can make an impact when he is on the field. And if you remember, he was a guy who, Miami had locked down, I think, relatively early in the recruiting cycle, and then right at the end, Alabama tried to get in and pry him away from Miami, and UM was able to hang on. So I'm very intrigued to see how he does in his second year. And then, like you said, Malik Bryant, who I think is playing more edge rusher now than linebacker, but he's there. Bobby Washington's there. The freshmen are there, but I don't think the freshmen are going to see a ton of playing time this year. Um, I think, like I said, like it's a decent group, but it could use a little more veteran depth. I think it's good to have a little bit more of an anchor there.
Yeah, a little more seasoning wouldn't hurt. And Cam Pruitt,
Exactly.
I think, is going to be more of a specialist, probably a third down cover linebacker, a guy who can come in and
Yeah, that
line up
makes
with the
sense.
with running backs and tight ends, and try to
Yeah.
stop them to allow you to do some things on defense, maybe from a pressure standpoint as well, rush them sometimes and surprise the other team. The front
Oh, I
four.
will say, I did forget about Kellen Wiley. As I mentioned, the freshman I didn't think would play much. I think Kellen Wiley can get some playing time early. I was thinking of like Ezekiel Elson, who I don't think will get a ton of time this year, but I think Wiley might see the field a bit.
Yeah, he was a nice pickup out of Armwood High School in the Tampa area. All right, so defensive line wise, you have some veterans obviously back, Ruben Bain, Keem Mazador, who is back for his sixth year. Both of those guys over 20 career starts. You added David Blay out of Louisiana Tech to that defensive tackle position. But I think defensive tackle is probably, and I mentioned Braxton Felly as a guy that Miami's looking at out of Boise State. It's still a position where you probably want to add a veteran guy if you can. You got Ahmad Moten, you got the talented Justin Scott, the former five-star, who's going to definitely be in the rotation. You got Armando Blunt. You got some big body guys, but you did lose Josh Horton to the portal, who was one of those big D tackles. So it seems to me that it's inevitable Miami's going to add a D tackle in the portal.
Yeah, I agree. Even before they lost Josh Horton, I thought they should go out and get a defensive tackle. So yeah, definitely need some more depth, guys who can rotate in with Blay and Moten and Scott. I think that's kind of a gimme. Like you need to go get a defensive tackle. Edge rusher, I like their edge rushers. I mean, you got Mesidor and Bain, who two experienced, talented guys. Behind them, everyone's been raving this spring about Armando Blunt and about Hayden Lowe, the freshman, who was their highest rated prospect in the 2025 class. Um, Everyone's been raving about them, saying they had great camps. And then you also got like Malik Bryant, Booker Pickett, and some other guys who I'm sure will rotate in and out. But uh, you know that two deep at the very least, I think defensive end is pretty good and can probably stack up with most, if not any team in the ACC.
Yeah, I think from a talent standpoint, you look at that defensive line and you say three five-stars are in there. It's a pretty good group, and then you got that's not even counting Ruben Bain. So I think you're right. I think they will have one of the better defensive starting units in the ACC for sure, with some guys off the bench that could do some things for you. So we'll see what they do in the portal. We still 10-day window just open. I expect there'll probably be some more guys who decide to take off because they see the writing on the wall that they're not going to be playing a whole lot here at Miami. And that's normal. That's not, I'm not sitting here picking on the Hurricanes and saying, this is a bad thing. It's just part of the process in college football nowadays. You kind of go
Yeah,
through
exactly.
you kind of have 2 year windows with guys, where they might be here for a year or two, and if it doesn't work out, they hit the portal and go. So I'm sure we'll have more people to talk about leaving in the next episode of this off-season wide right podcast. Adam, let's look big picture here. Year 4 for Mario. What are your expectations, man? Like, when you walked away from the spring camp, how do you feel about this team going into the fall?
I'm I feel positive about them. I think so you look at last year, they had the number one offense in the country, but the defense was pretty mid. This year, the offense will probably take a step back. Maybe they end up top 25 offense, but the defense I think will be substantially better. So where does how does that work out? I mean, you can play the schedule game. I think, they're non-conference. You have two very tough games in Notre Dame and Florida, but you get them both at home. And then the ACC schedule again is still pretty manageable, just like any other year. I mean, part of me thinks this roster, I, my gut says like 10-2 should be the floor again. I think this team should be good. Um, if even if the offense is not quite as good, the defense should be substantially better. Especially if they make those portal additions we were talking about and bring in some more solid guys. I think that evens out, and you should end up with a pretty good team that's, a playoff and ACC title contender again. And I think that's where, Mario Cristobal's trying to get this program to be a consistent playoff contender. With a 12-team playoff, you should be contending for it if you're at Miami. So I think they should be there again. I think, whether they take that next step and win that 11th game and get into the playoffs and win the conference, you know, that remains to be seen. But I think this team should be, at least result wise, similar to last year.
Okay. Well, if all if, if Carson Beck is healthy and those receivers
Yeah.
are as
Yeah.
good as advertised, the freshman receivers I'm talking about, then I think this can be a 10-win team that pushes to get into the ACC championship game. I agree with you on that front. I think the defense will be better. But again, it honestly feels, Adam, like nobody really knows until we get to August because you don't know who's going to be healthy. You don't know who's going to get nicked up in camp. You don't know, like there's just so many questions from here to there, right? And you don't know who's going
Yeah.
to leave via the portal because they're disgruntled or they want more money, and so which
And like
brings
you look at Carson Beck, and Carson Beck 2023, if they get 2023 Carson Beck,
right.
they're in great shape. If they get 2024 Carson Beck, they're in okay shape. Like, I mean, 2024 Carson Beck is still probably better than, Emory Williams or Judd Anderson or Luke Nickel this year, but that's a difference. And there's always a question, you look at elbow surgery. I'm a huge baseball fan. You look at, a pitcher who has Tommy John surgery, they come back and a lot of times they're fine and they're able to pitch well again, but not everyone is. So that's a question mark. Do I think Carson, for all the, everything Mario said during the spring was that Carson Beck was ahead of schedule and doing well in his rehab, which is great news and great to hear. But until he suits it up in August against Notre Dame, we don't know for sure. It's still a question mark. So, like you said, yeah, we're not going to know until this team is fully formed in August.
Right. And that's why people ask me, Manny, why'd you take 3 months off? Well, one, it's the off season. I don't know that I could talk about spring football every day. And two, I had other things to do, man. There's I had other things, other assignments to take care of. So I'm glad though that I brought you back for this first one since you were there at practice. I went for the first day essentially, got my look, talked to some people week to week about what was going on and formed my opinions there. But I think that spring game wasn't televised. Coaches sort of pulling back the reins on everything because they're so worried about people coming after their players in the offseason. And it is crazy. There were over 1,000 players that got into the portal yesterday when it opened for the spring window, and a lot of them 2025 guys, Adam. Like I was looking at the list. There's like freshmen that just got on campus in December and are pulling the plug and looking to go elsewhere already. And it just shows you the state of how crazy college football is. Let's talk about a big story in college football. Obviously, Nico Iamaleava from Tennessee, the quarterback, leads his team to the playoffs. Uh, I knew we were going to get to this point at some point, right? Where a player who signs a big contract holds out for more money, and that's essentially what happened. Nico misses the final like practice or two with his teammates, and then enters the portal because Tennessee doesn't want to pay him more than he's due, which was about $2 to $2.5 million. That hasn't really happened at Miami. I know Mario Cristobal talked about it. Um, but it's inevitable until we reach a point where maybe we have a players association and some sort of CBA between the parties that this is going to happen in sports going forward. I'm curious to gather your thoughts on the Nico story and just, you were there for Mario's comments and how he sort of spoke about it. It's inevitable. This is going to happen at Miami at some point where, and maybe it has already, right?
Well, that's what I was listening to. I think it was Andy Staples and Ari Wasserman on their podcast, and they were saying that it's probably happened way more than we know about because when it's handled well, it's all behind closed doors and nobody knows about it.
Right.
Where a player says, "I want more money," and the coaches either say, or the coaches or whoever representative of collectives and whatever, they either say yes or they say no. If they say yes, the player stays and makes more money, or they say no and the player hits the portal. I'm sure it happens way more often than, we hear about. What the problem with Nico and why it's kind of, potentially blown up in his face is that it played out in public and, Tennessee called his bluff and now he's going to UCLA. So we'll see what happens with that. But overall, I mean, I say this as somebody who is, active in the union at my newspaper and kind of help throw things together there. They just need contracts in the CBA. It's not like it's college sports or college football at least is professional now. That's the reality. Just sign players to contracts, and maybe it'll start happening when revenue sharing gets implemented and teams and like the actual schools can sign players directly instead of having to go through collectives. But just sign a contract. Player X signs a contract with the University of Miami for 2 years. You are here for 2 years. You will get paid X amount of money. And in the contract, it says you are able to do this in terms of like, you have to report for practice unless excused, or you have to do this or whatever. Otherwise, some of your money is forfeit. Like, these were all adults. Are they young adults? Absolutely. But they're adults and they're getting paid real money. Uh, it's time to formalize this into contracts like that are binding for both sides. Where Mario Cristobal can't tell underperforming freshman X that they have to leave after a year because they have a 2-year contract. Because that's the risk you take when you sign a contract for both sides. They're both bound to it. So that's where it's going to have to end up. I think it'll simplify everything. It'll make things easier for coaches because they don't have to worry about recruiting every player every semester. They know that if somebody's bound to a school for 2 years, bound to a program, they don't have to be recruited after their freshman year. It'll just make everything, I feel like, so much simpler. Um, if everything is like I said, I'm a big baseball fan. Baseball contracts are the easiest. They're binding for the length of the contract with guaranteed money. It's so simple. I feel like that's where it's got to come down to. Like, this is a professional sport now, and we should just act like it.
I agree. It's about time that college football got to that point. Let's dive into some mailbag questions. We got some responses here from readers and listeners who want to pick our brains. This first one is from Steven Thunder on Twitter. He says, "Is Emory still ahead of Nickel at the quarterback position, or are they closer to neck and neck? What's your feeling about the backup QB job?"
I think if you gave Mario Cristobal a true serum, he would say Emery Williams is the number two. He's the guy with the experience. He started. He had, he got the majority. He got the first team reps for the spring game through spring practice. Like, he is pretty clearly the number two. If I had to make a depth chart, I might put Luke Nickel number two. Um, I like Luke Nickel. When I saw him in high school, did he, wow me? No, he's not like, 5-star start me immediately kind of guy, but he was solid. And I think that's kind of how he looked um as spring went on and in the spring game. Early in the spring, you could tell he needed to kind of play catch up in terms of just like getting on, they talk about the pace of play and the speed of the game. Like, he needed to play catch up with that. It was pretty obvious early in the spring that even an untrained eye like me could notice that. Um, but as spring went on and we saw him a little bit more, and the coaches kind of talked about this, things started to slow down for him. He got more comfortable with the playbook. And I think by the time the spring game came around, like, he was making some of the best throws of the day. I think he threw I can't remember if he threw, like, there were no stats, so I'm going off the dome here. I know he threw the touchdown pass to Malachi Tony. He actually no, I don't. I don't remember who threw the touchdown pass to Malachi Tony. Maybe it was Emery, but he probably looked the best, at least on deep balls. He was the one I think who pushed the ball down the field the most. So I like him. I think he's a guy who will be competing for the starter role, if not next year, then maybe in 2 years. But um, I think he might have the most talent of that quarterback room. Whether that puts him at number two, maybe not quite yet, but I think he has the talent to be there at least.
I watched Luke Nickel and nice kid like his dad. Watched him as a junior. I just didn't see it. I didn't see the superstar. I see the caretaker. I see the guy. I see another Emory Williams. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe my eyes are bad and I shouldn't trust them. I think Darion Coleman is the talent, and he's the 26 quarterback who was part of a 9-player recruiting class now for Miami.
Yeah,
That is
everyone's
that
raving about Darion Coleman, so you might be right on that.
Yeah, that's the kid I was more wowed by. But hey, we'll see what happens with the quarterback position moving forward. Let's get to Bregs816 on Twitter. Mark is his name. What was the issue with Carr? What do you think happened with Carr and why he's not at Miami anymore?
I mean, I just don't know if there was a spot for him. I think he might have just gotten passed up on the depth chart by other guys, and he probably wasn't going to start this year. And they recruited. I really liked the wide receiver group they brought in this year's recruiting class in Tony and Josh Moore. And Dalen Upshaw looked pretty solid in the spring as well. I think, he might just want to go somewhere else where he has a better chance to play sooner. I don't know if he would have started this year at Miami. He probably would have been competing for a job next year as well. So might want to go to a place that, fit him better, which is, I mean, that's what you want to do. That's what you want to do. I mean, he's a talented kid, former top 100 guy. He did look good in spring. I saw him make some good catches. Um, but transfer portal is going to take a toll on your depth, and he would have been a very good rotational depth piece for Miami this year, and he's just wants to go somewhere where he can do probably more than that.
People forget when I was doing recruiting 2 decades ago and following these kids out of high school, they used to all talk about uh, you know, 3-year plan, right? They want to come in, be a part of a 3-year plan and go to the NFL. That's really what happens, right? I mean, to me, I think all of these kids internally, and Nikar is going into year two, and as you mentioned, he wasn't going to start. He was going to be a guy coming off the bench, and fighting for a position going into year three. Georgia native, not tied to South Florida. Does not surprise me in the least that this happened.
Yeah, and look, who can I can't fault I really can't fault the player for one wanting to play in general, and
Right.
two like wanting to get the most out of their time. Um, for whatever they think is best. Because I mean, think about it, just a big picture thing. Like this is football; it's a violent game. Your career could be over like on any given play in practice or in a game. So you want to get as much playing time as you can and try to get to the NFL in 3 years if you can. Like I can't fault anyone for that.
Yeah. Can't at all. Let's get to the next question here. This is from Brandon on Twitter. Other than quarterback, what position groups couldn't afford a major injury right now? What is up with the U pushing this Gigi the Ibis stuff all of a sudden? That's what position group do you think cannot afford a major injury?
Huh. I might go. It's tough to say because I mean quarterback's obviously the biggest one, but I think the area right now as the roster stands might be linebacker. If like Wesley, like not knock on wood, knock on everything.
Mm-hmm.
Like if Wesley Saints were to get hurt, I think that would be a big blow. And because I think that's where their depth as the roster stands right now. I think they should add another linebacker to protect against like something like this. As it stands right now, Wesley Saints gets hurt. Your most experienced linebacker is Jalen Alderman, who does have a lot of experience and is a solid linebacker, but isn't a star. And then a bunch of young guys who are right now on fairly unproven. Uh, could they be very good? Yes, of course, but it would open up a huge question mark, I think, for Miami, and probably where their depth, I think, might be tested the most with a major injury. Uh, do I think they could they survive it? Yeah, but I don't. That's probably the spot that stands out to me the most, where they could use some more depth.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think linebacker is the biggest position on defense, and I would say from an offensive perspective, um, I think if anything were to happen to their left tackle, at this point,
Yeah,
that would cause some uncomfortable reshuffling.
yeah, yeah.
That
I,
and
I think
not
I
that
think it. I
Francis
mean,
Maui knew he couldn't do it, but
right.
you kind of screw up a good thing.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I agree. I think that. Yeah, I think linebacker probably number one, offensive tackle like probably number two. Receiver, maybe. I mean, like I said, they probably receiver as it stands right now too. If like CJ Daniels or JoJo got hurt for an extended period of time, that'd be
Yeah,
pretty bad and pretty rough. But uh, we'll see where they add more depth in the portal because I think you could mitigate those potential possibilities in the next 10 days.
yeah. All right. My friend Larry Shender, Miami Media Associate says, what are your expectations in terms of what we get in the portal? Any surprises coming? We kind of covered it earlier. Do you expect a surprise, Adam, or do you think this is pretty much just pick a couple guys here and there?
Um, I wouldn't say I mean, I don't expect a surprise because it's a surprise. It would be a surprise. But
Yeah.
I mean, like Marcus Ball's been very open about this since day one. Since he's been at Miami. He's going to improve the roster wherever he can. If I don't know, Arch Manning entered the portal, would he not recruit him because Carson Beck?
Right.
I don't know. Like, I mean, we probably wouldn't have the budget for it. 'Cause Arch Manning would probably cost $5 million. But my point is like, he's not going to stand pat when there's a better option available. He could bring in two portal receivers in the next 2 days, and if Jeremiah Smith jumps in the portal, he's going to recruit Jeremiah Smith. Um, so I mean, I don't expect a surprise, but if there's a better player at a position, I think he'll at least give it a shot. if he can improve the team in some way. Now, I don't expect him to add another cornerback because they've already got too many cornerbacks to play. So I don't expect him to add a top end cornerback in the spring. But other than that, like I mean, he'll look to improve the roster wherever he can, I think.
Yeah. All right. A couple more and then we're gonna wrap this up, man. I appreciate all the time you've given me again, Adam.
Yeah, no problem.
Ralphie Rodriguez wants to know thoughts on Cantwell and Pepe's recruitment. Who is the better recruit? Of course, they're talking about two of the best offensive tackles in the country that are part of the 2026 recruiting class that Miami is going after. Jackson Cantwell, a kid out of Missouri, and Pepe, Kenya Pepe, who plays at Bradenton IMG Academy. Um, who do I think is the better recruit? I think, look, Cantwell is ranked higher. He's 6'8", 300 pounds, legitimately. Pepe is 6'7", 320, a little bigger. I think Pepe, I look at him and I watch him. He's a right tackle. Cantwell is a left tackle. I think in today's game, left tackle will always take precedence. But I would take another CC Maui Noah at right tackle, right? I mean, what are your thoughts on the recruitment of these guys? Do you think Miami gets either of them?
Hey, why not get them both? They brought in CC and Samson Okunlola, two five-star tackles in the same class. Do it again, whatever. Um, no, I mean, obviously you're happy with getting one. You'd be happier you get both. I don't have any super deep insider, information on either of their recruitments, but I did speak to both of them when we were at the Under Armour media day. Both of them spoke highly in Miami. Now, granted, that's 3 months ago now, 4 months ago, but both spoke very highly in Miami. I remember Cantwell. Um, he listed off when at the time he was considering like 12 schools. He listed them all off, and it was all SEC and Big Ten and
Yeah.
Miami. And he mentioned that he was like, "Yeah, I want to go to one of these big time programs and these big time conferences." But he also said that he thinks Mirabal is one of the best offensive line coaches in the country. He thinks very highly of Mario Cristobal. Um, I think that's why Miami, in addition to NIL money, I'm sure, is still in this recruitment, with other SEC and Big Ten programs. So I think they have a shot at landing Cantwell. Pepe, I'm not as sure about. I don't think his recruitment is as imminent as Cantwell, who's deciding it at the end of this month. But
Right.
I think Miami, like, hey, this is the time to bring in big time offensive linemen. You're going to be losing your right tackle probably at the end of the year. Probably going to lose your left tackle as well, and Markel Bell, who I think is going into his fourth season. So maybe he has 6 years eligibility. Who knows anymore? But he's going to would be in his fifth year next year. So you can use more offensive tackles, high end offensive tackles, and that's two guys. If you can get one, great. If you can get two, even better.
Yeah, I would assume that Miami is a serious contender for both of them. Cantwell is represented by Rosenhaus Sports. We
Right.
know Rosenhaus, the amount of business that he does, uh, his agency does with Miami players. I think that alone is a reason why you can say that Miami is in it. I think it's the way college football and professional sports work. So follow those hints.
Yeah.
And I think with Pepe. The fact that he is a West Coast guy, but has had a relationship with Mario for a long time now. Um, yes, his brother plays for USC, and yes, he's a California guy, but he's looking mostly at Southeast schools. And I think, Miami has a really good chance there as well. I'm not making any predictions, but I think the Hurricanes are definitely in it for both of them. So we'll see what happens there. Last question from Ralphie, and I don't know the answer to this because I don't talk to enough people at Miami in terms of the actual staffers and people that would make these kind of decisions. But he asked, any idea what plans the football team has to celebrate the school's centennial? I'm hoping for a throwback uniform somewhere on the schedule, or at least Sebastian getting his pipe back. What are your what have you heard in terms of centennial celebrations for Miami?
I haven't heard anything. I don't know the answer either, but I'm sure they could think of some good throwbacks. I think about like the stuff that Home Field Apparel, free ad has for the Hurricanes, and it's good. If I didn't cover the team, I might buy some because it's good stuff. So there's definitely a lot of potential there for throwback stuff that I'm sure would look really good.
All right. Adam, I appreciate you, man. Thank you so much. I got to get to soccer practice with my daughter here shortly and hopefully try to get win number 2 on the season. It's been a tough
Hey, there you
year,
go.
Adam. It's been a tough year.
Well, you'll get a good draft pick next year though, right?
That's the way it should work. It doesn't, unfortunately. All right, man. Appreciate you. We'll be back with more Wide Right. I'll have Carlos back at some point. For those of you clamoring for Carlos, I got a text message that says no Lato, no peace. So at some point he'll be back. But we thank Adam from the Sun Sentinel. Be sure to check out his work at sunsentinel.com and follow him on Twitter or X. I'm still calling it Twitter.
Twitter,
Uh,
Blue Sky,
Blue,
LinkedIn, who knows?
right.
Anything.
Follow him there. Adam, thanks for your time, man. Appreciate you.
Thanks for having me.